Hey there, how there, ho there. It's Jeff Cutter Diamond welcoming you to yet another Cutter Top 10 sports video. And today we are looking at the top 10 World Series upsets of all time. I know I could also say playoff upsets, but the World Series is always a time to see if teams could get upset and all that. Of course, rocking the Toronto Blue Jays jersey and all that. So, what I'll be wearing today for Game 3. Yeah. As of this taping, the Blue Jays and Dodgers have finished 2 games, and we'll be going to Game 3. And no, the Blue Jays are not in any of this top 10. All right, number 10 is the 1997 World Series between the Florida Marlins and the Cleveland Indians. Now, this is a massive upset because of how much Florida came off of it. In 1993, the Florida Marlins were the expansion team alongside the Colorado Rockies. Florida people didn't figure that Florida, in their 5th season of existence, would get to the World Series, much less the playoffs. They had basically bounced through. They made some massive trades. They picked up some key players and free agency, and basically, as some books have said, they bought the World Series, if you will. The Marlins were expected to get their butts handed to them by the San Francisco Giants and Barry Bonds. Didn't do so in the NLDS. In the NLCS against everyone's favorite team, the Atlanta Braves. Everyone thought the Braves were going to get to the final. Not so fast. The Braves used their power and skill. The Marlins used their power and skill, and Levon Hernandez, a non-nervous rookie who actually got the benefit of a big umpire's strike zone, Eric Gregg's strike zone. The Marlins beat the Braves in 6 and went to the World Series to take on those pesky Cleveland Indians. Cleveland were a fantastic team and all that. Not like the 95 team that won 100 games out of 144 and had Albert Bell win, 50 home runs, 50 doubles, but didn't win MVP because of his broodiness. No, Cleveland came back a couple years later. They had a tough series against Baltimore in the ALCS, but they did it. Everyone thought Cleveland was going to get their World Series, their first in 5 decades. Well, unfortunately, that didn't happen. It was a big contrast. You had sunny, warm temperatures in Florida, and you had cold and snowy conditions in Cleveland in the World Series. So Cleveland and Florida went to a game 7, and Cleveland was up 2-1 in the ninth. Jose Mesa usually never gives up a save. He blew the save, and the Marlins tied a game at 2. In the 11th inning, Tony Fernandez booted ground ball led to the Marlins winning the game 3-2 and winning the series in Game 7. Number 9 is the 1957 Milwaukee Braves beating the powerful New York Yankees. The Yankees were almost at every World Series in the 40s and 50s. In the 1950s, they only missed one World Series. That was 1954. So, yeah, they're the eighth year of the decade, the 7th time the Yankees were in the World Series. They won in 50, they won in 51, they won in 52, they won in 53, they lost in 55, they won in 56, and now 1957. The Milwaukee Braves coming off a campaign that they looked pretty good. And of course, Milwaukee 4 years prior got the Boston Braves to come to Milwaukee. Anyway, so yeah, those pesky Yankees. Yogi Berra was still in his prime. Um, Mickey Mantle still was around. Gil Maduga was around. Clete Boyer? No. Well, a lot of Yankee fans. However, the Braves had Eddie Matthews, Hank Aaron, and a few other players helping them, and Lou Burdette and Warren Spahn on the bump. The Braves would win Game 7 against the Yankees and shock everyone by doing it in New York. Number 8 is the 2001 Diamondbacks versus the Yankees. I know a lot of people said this was a massive shock. It should be higher on the list because, the Yankees were the 3-time defending champs. True, and of course, the Yankees were getting the fans cheering for them because of 9/11. I don't need to say any more. But the Diamondbacks were a star-crossed team, and in their 4th season of existence, the Diamondbacks not only won the NL West, they went to the World Series. In the NLDS, they took care of a plucky St. Louis Cardinals team, and then they took out the Atlanta Braves. The Diamondbacks would face the Yankees in a dramatic 7-game series. Diamondbacks won the first 2 games at home. The Yankees won the next 3 at home. Of course, games 4 and 5 were known for the game tying home runs and the winning home runs, if you will. Derek Jeter becoming Mr. in November in Game 4, and then Scott Brosius tying it up in Game 5. The Diamondbacks throttled the Yankees in Game 6, and then Game 7, it was a pitcher's duel between Curt Schilling and Roger Clemens. It was 1-1 till the 8th when Alfonso Soriano went deep. And then the Diamondbacks managed to get to Mariano Rivera. And it all worked. Tony Womack with a key hit, and then Lugo, as in Luis Gonzalez, his walk-off single in Game 7. The Diamondbacks beat the Yankees and were the world champs. I, of course, probably would have cheered for the Diamondbacks because of the bias because their nickname is my last name, in a sense, Diamond. But nevertheless, the Diamondbacks took care of the 3-time defending champion Yankees and all that, and brought a championship to the desert. Curt Schilling and Randy Johnson basically carried the Diamondbacks in that series. Number 7 is the Kansas City Royals against the St. Louis Cardinals in 1985. People say, how is that an upset? Well, given how St. Louis marched through everybody in the NL, and including the NLCS, although they were down 2-1 to the Dodgers and had to win 3 straight games. And they had to add to the degree of difficulty by doing it without Vince Coleman, who was injured by an automatic tarp. The Cardinals were pretty good. They had Ozzie Smith, they had Jack Clark, they had Harry Pendleton and Andy Van Slyke. The pitching wasn't that bad. John Tudor made a great move in 1985. But the Royals had to fight and scrap against the Toronto Blue Jays. Everyone picked the Blue Jays to win the ALCS. Tony Kubek, who did get Blue Jay games for CTV, actually surprisingly picked the Royals because of their left-handed starters. Blue Jays won 3 of the first 4 games, and it looked like they were going to go to the NLCS. But in the first year of the best-of-7 format, they lost the next 3. They would have been in the World Series. And Ozzie Smith would have had a penny-winning home run instead of a game-winning home run. But nevertheless, St. Louis did come back from take a 3-1 series lead. Kansas City with Brett Saberhagen would come back through. And in Game 6, of course, the chicanery of Don Denkinger, an American League umpire. If he was a National League umpire, it would be awkward. But yeah, he made that terrible safe call. But then Jack Clark misplayed a pop-up that would have given him an out. And then the kid running the ball. And then Darrell Porter had a terrible play, and the ball passed him. He had a pass ball, and then he missed a crucial tag. The Cardinals basically played like they were beaten and just basically wanted to kick the shit out of the Royals and the umpires. They kind of did. Joaquin Andujar got booted for 5 games in the 1986 season for his thing on Dankinger, who was the home plate umpire that day. So yeah, the Royals won 11-0, and the Cardinals just basically couldn't believe it. Number 6 is the New York Giants beating the Cleveland Indians 1954. People would never see this coming. The New York Giants, well, the Giants franchise have been big. They ended up getting Willie Mays back from military duty. And a few other people like Johnny Antonelli did their job. Monty Irvin did his job. The Giants were playing in decrepit polo grounds, but they did their job. What's even more impressive is that Cleveland not only won 111 games, which was a new AL record, but Cleveland were tops in the AL ahead of the Yankees, of all people. Of all people. Yeah, the Giants beat the Indians. Cleveland thought they had it in Game 1 at the Polo Grounds when Vic Wertz hit that ball, and Willie Mays somehow made that over the shoulder catch. And then, of course, with it being so deep in center field, like 450 feet, he had to really fling the ball to make sure that the runners can only move up like 1 base instead of 2. So yeah, in a normal ballpark that would have been a home run, but this is the Polo Grounds. Cleveland could not believe it, and worst of all, in the 10th, tied at 2, Dusty Rhodes, not the wrestler, but the baseball player, hit a 3-run pinch hit home run to make it 5-2, and the Giants took care of the Cleveland Indians easily in 4 straight. I mean, to take care of a 111-win team like that, there's one thing, but to do it in a sweep, hell's a breeze. Number 5 is the 2003 Marlins against the New York Yankees. Those pesky Marlins make it in for the second time on this list. The Yankees were the Yankees. Sure, they botched 2001 and then they didn't do well in 2002, falling to, I believe it was the Twins in the playoffs. But nevertheless, the Yankees were back. They were better than ever. Aaron Boone, of all people, with the home run off Tim Wakefield, basically that's the only good thing he is. He's a good manager, but he'll probably be gone soon. But what's even more impossible was the 2003 Marlins. They fired their coach, and Jack McKeon, at 73 years old, decided to come back to the major leagues to be the manager. He used some great players like Alex Gonzalez, Mike Lowell, a young Miguel Cabrera, and a young Dontrell Willis to help the team win. They had some veteran help like Derek Lee, but yeah, the Marlins beat the Yankees. Well, after the Marlins beat the Cubs in one of the most crucial LCSs in history. Well, the Yankees did that to the Red Sox in 7 games because of Boone's home run on Tim Wakefield. But the Marlins were down 3 games to 1, won Game 5 at home, but the Cubs were confident, winning Game 6 at home. But unfortunately, Bartman happened. 3-0 was the score for the Cubs, and he boogled it. He wasn't the guy that, caught the ball. It was just the fact that the ball found him. Bartman was basically made persona non grata. Governor Blagojevich basically says that he'll never get a pardon out of me. And of course, the funny thing is, he went to jail years later and could not take hair dye. What a prick. Basically trying to throw him under the bus. Also, Alex S. Gonzalez, former Blue Jays shortstop, should be thrown under the bus. He made a terrible play on a double play that could have saved a few runs. Basically, you know, people, he made people forget about Bartman himself. But nevertheless, the Cubs would have won Game 7. They should have, but the Marlins won Game 7. So the Marlins would take on the Yankees, and in 6 games they would win. Alex Gonzalez, the Miami Alex Gonzalez, hit a home run off Jeff Weaver in Game 4, and Josh Beckett threw a 3-hit shutout in Game 6. And the Marlins did it. What's even worse for Montreal Expos fans is that Jeffrey Loria was the owner of the Marlins when he won the title. Basically, put, Loria was trying to get rid of the Expos in the worst way possible. He couldn't. He pissed off a lot of people, and the fact was that they made a swap. Florida's manager John Henry would become Boston's owner. Uh, Jeffrey Loria would leave Montreal for Florida and take a lot of his staff and equipment with him. And Major League Baseball would just basically carry the Expos around for 2 years as an albatross. Number 4 is the 1988 World Series, Dodgers A's. On paper, this really looked like an A's win. Oakland were starting to get better. The Bash brothers were in play. Canseco and McGuire. Canseco had that 44 season. Dave Stewart was pretty good. Dave Henderson was pretty good. Don Baylor even played for that team. Everyone thought Oakland was going to win the World Series. Not so fast. The LA Dodgers, massive underdogs to win the NL West. They did so. And then they shocked the New York Mets in Game 7 of the LCS to do it. It also helps that Mike Scioscia hit that key home run for the Dodgers in Game 4 of the playoffs. And also the fact that Jay Howell got suspended for pine tar in his glove and Earl Hershiser came out for a save. So yeah, the Dodgers would take on the A's. It looked bad for the Dodgers as Tim Belcher gave up a grand slam to Jose Canseco that hit off the NBC camera in center field. So that was big. However, the Dodgers would chip away. It was 4-3. What's even more impressive was the Dodgers were doing it without Kirk Gibson, who was who would be named NL MVP, but he injured himself during the Mets series. So he wouldn't be coming up to bat. And Vin Scully, who did the Dodgers games for TV and who was doing games for NBC, said Kirk Gibson wouldn't do it. However, Gibson was like, the hell with that. I'm going to try. Help my team. Fortunately, a pitch to, who was the walk? It was Mike Davis, I think it was, the walk to. And then Kirk Gibson came up, and on a 3-2 backdoor slider, he managed to launch into right field. I don't believe what I just saw. I don't believe what I just saw. Now, those weren't Vin Scully's words. Those were Jack Buck's calls for CBS radio. But yeah, the Dodgers used it. Orel Hershiser, off of his 59 inning scoreless streak, helped out with 2 wins over the A's. So he did his job. Dodgers won in 5 games. Oakland did win a game because of Mark McGwire's walk-off in Game 3, but that's it. Number 3 is the 1990 Reds against the A's. So the A's were in a good dynasty. 88, they won the AL pennant, but failed to win the World Series. 89, they won the AL pennant against the Blue Jays, but they won the World Series against the Giants. And in 1990, they were back, baby. The A's were looking good. They had Ricky, they had Jose Canseco, they had Mark McGwire. Now, the funny thing is, people forget that Ricky Henderson did not play for the 88 A's. No, Ricky Henderson was actually a New York Yankee between 1985 and 1989 when the Yankees traded him back to Oakland. But yeah, Ricky was the big ingredient with Canseco and McGwire. And pitching like Bob Welch's 27 wins, Dave Stewart was still around. Dennis Eckersley had one of the best relievers years of all time. But the Reds were powerful, even though that they didn't really have any key players. Well, Jose Rijo, Chris Sable, and Paul O'Neill will basically tell me to shut up. The Reds did go wire to wire, winning the NL West, not dropping it at all. And then they ended up taking out the Pirates and were hosting Game 1 of the World Series. And of course, Marge Schott, in their stupidity, dedicated everything to the Far East instead of the Middle East, because the Gulf War. Nevertheless, since he pulled it out, Billy Hatcher went 9 for 12 in the 4-game series, which was a new World Series record for batting average. Chris Sable, Eric Davis was doing it, but then he suffered a lacerated kidney after a dive in Game 4 of the World Series in Oakland, and Mark Schott refused to pay for a plane back for him for surgery. That kidney would actually ruin Eric Davis's career, unfortunately. But yeah, the fact is that the Reds shocked the A's using their 3-headed bullpen of Rob Dibble, Randy Myers, and who was the other guy? Norm Charlton. That's it. So the Reds shocked the A's, sweeping them. At least the Dodgers didn't sweep the A's. Number 2 is the 1969 New York Mets against the Baltimore Orioles. I know everyone will be thinking, are you crazy? That is number 1. No, there's a reason why it's not number 1. Nevertheless, the 69 Mets were big. Well, Baltimore were the big bad bullies of the AL. But of course, with the new expansion and all that, 12 teams per league, they had 2 divisions of 6. So they had to add an extra round. You weren't going to the World Series automatically if you won your division. You would have to go to a division series. Well, it's called the League Championship Series, best of 5, to find out who gets to the World Series. The Orioles crushed the Twins. Well, they had 2 extra inning wins. They swept the Twins. And then they were hoping to crush those pesky New York Mets. The Mets in 1962 were an expansion team, lost 120 games, which is the National League record for losses in a year, not the Major League mark. That's now the 2024 White Sox crops the bear. But the Mets just couldn't get out of it. They only finished above ninth place. They never finished above ninth place out of 10 teams. And then once Montreal and San Diego came, it was 2 groups of 6. The Mets had some talent. They drafted well. They got Tom Seaver. They got Jerry Gentry. They got Jerry Koosman and a young Nolan Ryan, too. I mean, they had some good players. Tommy Agee, Ed Kranepool, Don Clendenin, who almost went to Montreal, but he whined and complained that he didn't want to go to Montreal. Nevertheless, the Mets were just a miracle. And somehow, in some way, they won the NL East. The Cubs were just basically stepping their way through. Ernie Banks would Ron Santo would click his heels after every game. Ernie Banks was playing his heart out, and it looked like the Cubs were going to get the NL East, but no way. The Mets somehow won thanks to a black cat, of all things. The Mets would shock the Atlanta Braves to go to the World Series against the Baltimore Orioles. Orioles and Mets split the first 2 games, and then the Mets put up 3 straight wins on home turf, which was shocking. Game 3 was the Tommy Agee show, with his 2 massive catches saving at least 5 runs. Ron Swoboda made a fantastic catch in Game 4, although there was a run that crossed the plate to tie the game. But it could have been worse. And then the 10th was when um, Rod Gaspar, no, JC Martin was pinch hitting, and then he dragged a bunt, and then Pete Richard of the Orioles threw the ball, but somehow it hit JC Martin and ricocheted away, and Rod Gaspar scored. But the rules should have. But JC Martin was outside the baseline. He could fear out, but he has to fear back into the baseline to not to interfere with the throw. It was a controversial play, and it hurt the Orioles. And then game 5, the Orioles looked pretty good. Dave McNally went deep off of Jerry Koosman, but the Mets didn't give up. Duncan then went deep. Um, there was There was a shoe polish play as Cleon Jones had shoe polish been hit by shoe polish, so he was on base. And then the Mets went through and won 5-3 to win the pennant. Well, you want to know what number 1 is? Here's number 1, and that is the 1906 World Series between the Chicago Cubs and the Chicago White Sox. You'll be thinking, that early? Why? Well, simply put, the 1906 Cubs were dominant. You know, if you look at the Major League Baseball record for most wins in the season, that's 116. Yes, the Seattle Mariners have that mark, but the 1906 Cubs beat them to it with 116 wins in their season, and it was only a 152 game season, so they probably would have done it at least 122, maybe 123 if the modern 162 happened. Like, everyone was just stunned, dumbfounded. You know, it is what it is. People were shocked. But the fact of the matter is that, the 1906 Cubs were fantastic. They had some good hitting. They had the Tinkers to Evers to Chance double play combo, supposed double play combo. They had Three Finger Brown and Ed Roebuck pitching. And, you had Sully Hoffman and Jimmy Slagle hitting doubles and triples. But lo and behold, they lost the World Series to the Chicago White Sox in 1906. The White Sox were pretty decent. They won the AL, but based on their pitching, you know, Ed Walsh, Doc Profil? No. I would say Doc Profil, but that's not it. There was a Doc. Doug White, that's it. Yeah, but, Ed Walsh and Doc White and a few other people were hitting balls. And somehow, in some way, the White Sox and their quote unquote hitless wonders beat the Cubs to win the World Series. And people were stunned, baby. So, anyway, that's all I've got for today. I'm Jeff Diamond.